Yeah, so after watching Mutahar's videos about virtual machines in Linux, I decided to make a virtual machine of mine too. This is how it went. So, in order to make a good virtual machine for gaming or editing, you have to use a kernel-based virtual machine, KVM, and to pass through a graphics card, and to get the best graphics performance possible. This means that the VM can now communicate with the GPU as if it was bare metal. The downside to this is that the GPU is not fully dedicated to running the VM, and that's why people who use GPU pass-through use at least 2 GPUs or more. But you can still use single GPU pass-through, you just have to pass it back and forth from the host to the VM whenever you're using it. This means that whenever you start the VM, you'll have to use a script that unbinds the GPU from the host, which then means that it'll first have to close every single application that's using the GPU from Chrome to your graphical interface, unload the GPU driver, and then unbind it. It'll then hijack the GPU and use it to process everything that's going on in the VM, from your monitor to your games. Obviously, this setup comes with the downside of not being able to use both OSs at once, but it's also better and faster than dual booting. This is why. First of all, Windows is running inside of a virtual machine. It's not running on bare metal, and that also means that you're much more secure when using VM. For example, in the worst case scenario, if you get infected with ransomware, the VM and only the VM will get infected as long as you didn't pass through other drives. And second of all, the setup can actually be faster than dual booting because you're not going through the BIOS every time and Linux is still running in the background. This means that all it takes to go back to Linux is just shutting Windows down. If you want to go back to Windows again, just boot the Windows VM. With all that out of the way, let's get into how I made this setup. Back when I built my computer, I went with the most IOMMU friendly hardware, aside from my RX 580. AMD Polaris GPUs have a reset bug where you can't boot the VM twice without restarting the host. Thankfully though, there's a DKMS module that fixes this. It's called Vendor Reset. This aims to give the card a clean reset every time it gets passed into the VM and out, making you not require to restart every second time you want to start your VM. Anyway, I decided to go with the Windows 11 leaked build because I heard it gives a decent performance boost compared to Windows 10, and its dark theme looks pretty nice. After that finished downloading, I started by isolating the GPU from the rest of my components by using IOMMU. I saved the GPU's ID for later so that I can use that to pass through the GPU to the VM. I created the VM, after which I installed the Windows 11 leaked build onto it. I proceeded to bypass the Microsoft account by setting my email address to 1@1.com and my password to 1. I also turned off the default privacy settings. Soon after that was done, I turned off the VM and got back to setting up pass-through. I added hooks, which allowed me to pass the GPU back and forth from Windows to Linux. Hooks can actually be pretty tricky for VFIO noobs like me, as it took me a few hours to troubleshoot why my VM was black screening. Around 75% of those hours though, were probably me overthinking the startup hook, which was working. My problem was the fact that I also passed through a VBIOS ROM file for my GPU to use, and even though that should theoretically work, it simply doesn't work for me. Alright, so editing me here, I extracted my ROM file manually, and now it works, so... Anyway, after all that technical mumbo jumbo, I got to pass through the GPU to my Windows VM. I didn't know that I actually fixed it until I decided to wait 10 minutes for the guest to detect the GPU. And out of nowhere, oh look, my VM is indeed working. I just had to wait an eternity for it to even detect my GPU. Don't worry though, that's only a first time setup kind of deal. After that, it detects the GPU right away. Right away being when it gets to the welcome screen. So you won't see the Windows splash screen when you boot if you didn't load a VBIOS ROM file. After you log in, it works just like a real Windows PC. In fact, I get slightly better performance with my Windows 11 VM than with my Windows 10 install. And now I can use stuff like Adobe Creative Cloud, which is a must for me in my workflow. I've been getting by fine on Linux's tools such as Olive instead of Premiere and After Effects, and Krita instead of Photoshop. But as promising as Olive is for being free and open source, it still doesn't quite cut it if you want to do more advanced effects. And Premiere and After Effects run incredibly well in my Windows VM, in fact a bit better than on my Windows 10 install. But that might be because Windows 11 just runs better than Windows 10. You can also use a VM for gaming if a game you want to play doesn't work in Wine or Proton. I got some pretty good Cinebench results, with my Ryzen 5 1600 getting a 6700 score when overclocked. So yeah, This project was extremely fun to work on, and from now on, I'll be editing every single video in Premiere and After Effects. Might also be doing some benchmarks in this VM when I'm bored, but yeah, that's about it.